Hello, my name is Arthur Malman, your host for GGG Insights new series on the future of East Hampton, problems, opportunities. And we hope to have here, unlike the usual situation where we have the same voices over and over again, a whole cross-section of people, farmers, policemen, firemen, political people, talk about what they see as the problems facing East Hampton, and most importantly, the opportunities for the town going forward. Today's guest is Amos Goodman, who ran for the county legislature, and is now the head of the Republican Party here in East Hampton.
Thank you, Arthur, for having me, and thank you, GGG, for the great work you do in our community to further the discourse that's necessary. Appreciate you having me.
Well, you've obviously thought a lot about the problems of the town now and in the future. What do you think one of the two of the major issues that we should be focusing on as a community?
So look, this is not doom and gloom. This is a special strip of God's country. It is an incredible place. The people here, the landscape, we have so many opportunities. So I think we can start positively and say how blessed we are to call this place home. But there are problems. One of, I think, the biggest issues, and I've seen this over my life here, is we've seen the community atomized. I used to know all my neighbors, and now I don't know anybody. And I think that part of it is the changing makeup of who's coming here, whether or not and how much they're integrated into our civic life. I don't think they are nearly enough. And what opportunities exist for folks who come from this town to stay here. And those are economic, those are housing, some environmental. We have a lot of sort of ladder pullers in mentality who want to say, you know, we're full up, this is it, and not allow opportunities for people to stay here. That means growth, that means sustainable growth, but it means growth and done in a smart way. We don't want to talk about those smart questions. That's how you hollow out a community, that's how you kill it. I don't want East Hampton to be a place that is just the playground for plutocrats as well as service workers from Mid-Island. This needs to be a vibrant community. That's what we are now. That's what we've been historically. And to me, that's one of the greatest threats on the current path.
Well, we talk a lot about affordable housing to keep people in town, but you mentioned something that was kind of interesting, and that is integrating the people who are not here full-time or who were not born here into the community and having them get involved with the community. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We have, certainly during the peak season, but increasingly year-round, some of the best and the brightest in virtually every field here at our disposal. The titans of finance, the best of artists, of writers, they should be working, and we should allow the schools and other entities to tap into this great brain trust. I think about my grandfather who died about 25 years ago, but was a professor at Columbia of architecture and tried very hard to teach a summer class at Southampton College at the time because he thought he wanted to give back and this would be a great thing to do. We couldn't make it work. And there are a lot of people who have expertise that the schools, that local kids, that others could learn from, should learn from. And I think that would help bring people in overall into our civic life. That's what's essential. We have the sort of city people, quote unquote, and we have the locals, but we're all really the same. We're blended together. City people are voting out here. They should be part of the civic life. They should be learning about local issues. We should be learning from them and their expertise. And I think this town, as well as private organizations, should be doing a better job at tapping into that.
Yeah. Well, I was talking during a haircut with Vinny the barber in Amagansett, who's my touchstone for reality.
He does a great job.
It's grown in. But anyway, and I said, well, Vinny, there are a lot of people here who are here for 4 or 5 months and have lots of time on their hands. Maybe they want to get involved with the fire. Vinny's a member of the Sag Harbor Fire Department for many years. And he said, well, it doesn't really work that way, because if you want to become a fireman, there are months and months of training you have to go through. Okay. But he did say that, for example, there's still training, but not the extensive training for the ambulance corps. And the ambulance corps is something we need the most when the town is overflowing with people.
Absolutely.
To me, I've never seen anything, just like you said, I've never seen any effort made by the town or even the fire departments to try to tap into this group of people, not every one of whom wants to do everything, but some people may want to do something.
It's a great opportunity, and I don't think there's any place in the world that has the collection of people, certainly during the 4 months of the summer, but increasingly year-round, that are titans of industry or their respective fields in the way that our folks are. And what a missed opportunity that we're not able to learn from them and have them engaged. And I think that will help our political discourse too, because these will not just be people who vote absentee, blindly on a partisan line, for example. Maybe they'll get to know some of the local candidates and the local issues, and have more thoughtful ways of voting. I have a vested interest, obviously, as the Republican chairman, in seeing that we have some greater parity in how people vote. But I think that's important for non-self-interested reasons too.
What do you mean by that? Let's just hit on that for a second. Right now we have a town board that's 100% Democratic. What does that leave?
So I think we are seeing, this is the group for good government. And in my view, if you're for good government, you shouldn't be for single party rule. Because single party rule, whether it is here, whether it's anywhere, we saw this in Southampton when the partisan was the opposite, tends to lead to poor government decisions, tends to lead to a lack of transparency, hard decisions being made behind closed doors, not in view of the public, no checks and balances. The Republican Party deserves quite a lot of blame for this, because we haven't been a viable opposition in the way that we should be, in the way that we will be. But the fact is, single party rule isn't doing anyone any favors. It leads to factionalism within the ruling party, and then that's more backroom intrigue. And Southampton at one point had a 5-0 Republican conservative board. Same issues that we saw, you can see right now at Town Hall. And so, it's almost a moral imperative, frankly, the rebuilding of the party that I now lead, because we want to be a constructive check. We want to be a viable opposition. We want to run people. We want to win. We want to have a voice that isn't just in one partisan column.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the other points you mentioned, which was, I thought, very interesting, the opportunity to integrate some of the summer people and the people who are retired here and people who are here for 4 or 5 months at a time. And obviously, a lot of those people aren't titans of industry or very talented people, but they're willing to devote time and effort. And maybe we should figure out some way to organize that, which I think right now doesn't exist, unless I'm missing something. I mean, I don't think any of our friends that I know of who are here 4 or 5 months at a shot have gotten involved with many local charities or many local functions. Although they go to the dinners and that type of thing.
They'll do fundraising galas for mostly out-of-town charities, but that's not the same thing at all.
It's a lot different when you work with Meals on Wheels and actually deliver some of the food to the people. And
that's how you learn about your community.
That's exactly my point. I think that's an opportunity that has got to be focused on, and up to now has really been overlooked. Now, let's go to the other side. We always hear about the fact that, and again, I'll use the fire department example. First, the EMS didn't have enough volunteers, so we now have professionalized that in the busy season. The fire department is a massive commitment of time by very well-meaning people, but that group that will be committed to the fire department is shrinking. And it's shrinking because the kids can't, obviously the kids can't afford to live here. Are there any new ideas floating around that could make those kids have an opportunity to live here in an affordable way? I don't know.
So it's a few issues. Housing is a problem, and the deficit of housing, and I'd like to see us, do things like sewering in a few places like Montauk, maybe parts of Springs, be willing to build with a little bit of density around, say, the train station, places like that. That will help, not just a handful of accessory apartments, as if that's going to do anything. Look at LIRR expansion for intra-island to allow people to escape the trade parade and have access. Those are all things that can be done. But it's also barriers that the town board puts on in terms of the building department, in terms of zoning, to people who want to operate a business. And I will say, single party rule and the politicization of everything in this town is extensive. If I were somebody who had to make a living in this town, from this town, I could not be the Republican chairman. My business would dry up. And that is something that is used implicitly. It's also used overtly. And so it's very hard to do business in this town, even under good circumstances, unless you're part of the cabal. I was out doing petitions the last few weeks. It's political season, petition season. Some people complain about it. I like it. I think it's the front lines of democracy. You're talking to people at their house. You're engaging them in issues. Some people are rude. Some people are nice. They invite you in. They tell you what they care about. They ask you for things. There were so many people who were frightened of signing Republican petitions because they thought they would get retribution because they were town employees, because they had business interests before the town, real estate transactions before the town. That to me is scary. And I had not heard that before, and I heard that again and again.
Yeah. I was fortunate enough, by sheer coincidence, to be sitting at a town board meeting probably 7 or 8 years ago when a couple of kids from someplace up island came to the town and said, we want to start a brewery. And, there were a lot of things that Bill Wilkinson did wrong that we can all complain about, but his reaction at that town board meeting was welcome, and how can we help you?
That's exactly right.
And that happens to be something called Montauk Brewery, which I never would have expected.
There's some really great examples, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
Hampton's Hopper is another one, where local entrepreneurs or people, local and broadly defined, have gotten success here, and they've gotten a positive reception. But too often, those ideas are, squelched very, very early, and it's not conducive for a lot of reasons. Yeah. So we need to change that.
A few years ago, I was on one of the town committees with John Tintle. The Tintle family owns the sand pit in Wainscott. And the discussion was, well, would the Tintle family work with the town on dense housing in that sand pit area? To which John threw up his hands and basically said, I've only got a few more years, maybe 20 to live, and I couldn't get anything like that done during that short period of time with this town. And it was interesting because what John also explained to us was he actually, as one of his family's businesses, rented affordable houses, which were absolutely market rate. He did it for a profit. The cost to live in one of these houses was well within the budget of a working person here in town, but they were on small lots. And when you mention the word small lot out here, it's like an anathema, but you can't build a small, affordable house without using a small lot.
And there has to be a profit motive if you actually want it to be a sustainable enterprise that takes off. And it's a shame that these, there has to be a way also to equalize the burden on the various school districts. I know that's something that's come up in Wainscott. I live in Springs, We understand what that's like to have no tax base and have a very large school population that's, it's hurting. But there's got to be a way that we can, and I think that good, well-intentioned people can do the math and figure out how to level that across the hamlets.
Yeah, well, we had, the GGG did some studies of school consolidation. And one of the things we learned was you could only consolidate adjacent school districts. So if you
Without a state waiver.
Oh, okay, there's a state waiver. But, so as a result, it's hard to convince people in Amagansett, which has a tiny school population, to pick up some of the burden of the Springs. And without Amagansett, you can't get to Montauk. And it's sort of a domino thing.
There's also the question of the payment that, say, Springs School pays to East Hampton High School to send its students. That price is frankly almost as expensive as it would be to send a student to the Ross School. I think that should be subsidized. We should not be subsidizing East Hampton High School. The town should be. And maybe that's a way in the high school cross-district payments to equalize it a bit, because you're right, people in Amagansett don't want to see that. And they're right also to say that most of their houses are very high value and are not using the schools. And so
that's right.
That's
yeah, the school, I'm sure the school population in Amagansett is smaller now than it was. I know the same problem in Bridgehampton. They have a big school and you just think it's full, but it's really not.
Yeah.
And so we have these facilities around.
And then there's consolidation of back office, and there's a whole spectrum of consolidation that should be done. I would be supporting, frankly, townwide reassessment, because I think that's something that would be helpful to do.
Well, it's amazing, because GGG has held debates among candidates for the town board for almost 10 years now. And always when we bring up the question of reassessment, all the candidates are pretty slippery.
I'm not a candidate, so I can say it.
No, it's always the same mantra. Well, it's probably a good thing, but it's very expensive and we can't afford it now, but we'll look at it. The only person, to his credit, and the reason they say it is really simple, because they believe that if they say reassessment, that's their political doom.
It's code word for tax increase.
Tax increase, and they will go down to defeat in a blazing minute. Interestingly, the only person in those debates who ever said, yes, the town should do a tax reassessment now was Fred Overton, who, interestingly enough, had been the town tax assessor. And he really understood the situation. And ironically, now the town has some substantial surplus, to the credit of the Democrats and Fred Overton and some other people who worked for the town as town board members, and could afford to do a town-wide reassessment. And again, I think people are afraid of that word, but I know some statistical work that's been done has shown that basically the largest houses in East Hampton are underassessed because we've never been reassessed since God's creation.
And there's a way to do it right where you don't, all of us in a single year have a major change one way or the other, but to have a 5-year or even a 10-year graduated stepping to a higher assessment, if that's what it is. There's a way to mitigate it. It's not fair.
By the way, to your credit, Amos, you are a Republican and you're talking about tax changes.
I think it's not a tax increase. I think some people will get tax savings.
Sure.
And I think it's a more equitable and a more fair way to do it. And we should be relying on current information, not on very antiquated and outdated.
Yeah. One of the things that we found is some of the most modest houses in town, although they're assessed pretty low, they're still paying more than their fair share based upon what a revaluation to current market would show. But let's also talk, what other barriers are there that are surmountable to finding more business opportunities for people here in town? Because without businesses, there's no jobs. Without jobs, people can't stay. forgetting
Sure.
how much they're paid or not paid, you know?
Sure. It's an interesting question. I mean, I don't, we went through this whole exercise that the town championed with its consultants and these risible charrettes, they called them, and these sort of listening sessions of people who weren't from here, who, charged us a fair amount of money to spit out plans that were either discarded if they were provocative or were simply the warmed over consensus view. I have a consulting firm. I could have done it for a tenth of the price and probably gotten some more
Wait,
interesting.
this is public television. You can't advertise.
Okay, fair enough. I'm not soliciting business. So that would have been a perfect opportunity. We don't have a comprehensive master plan. We don't do zoning in a proper comprehensive manner in this town. Those would be all things to think about as we look at where are areas that can be developed for what uses. We have the airport not that far from here in Wainscott. That's a big question. People have talked about additional things on Industrial Road here. That seems like an opportunity.
Well, that's a great example. I happen to know a little bit about that. And it's one of the things that drives me insane, that we have vacant commercial land
Right.
on Industrial Road, ready for development, and nobody in the town wants to spend the time or effort to make the world know that it's for lease. We get around 50,000 an acre. Now it goes into the airport fund, but if the land is sitting vacant in 2017, even if you lease it in 2020, you can never get back the money you lost in 2017.
That's right.
And if you go out to Industrial Road, which you did to get to this studio, you see no sign, you have no idea that there is any land for rent by the airport.
It's very interesting.
It just doesn't exist. And it's the type of, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that if you do something to advertise this, people will come and at least look. And for every looker, you're going to get, not everybody's going to buy or rent, but if you don't have anybody looking, you don't have anybody renting. And
That's
that opportunity for 2018 rents will be gone forever.
And look, my understanding is Southampton around
the way-
Gabreski Airport has done a better job.
Oh yeah, but more importantly, even than the revenue for the airport, or the town eventually, it creates jobs.
Yes.
I guess it's a company called Landscape Details. In the last 2 years, rented a plot of land at the airport at the airport industrial park along Industrial Road. And if you see these light green trucks going around, it says Landscape Details. They needed a place to put their equipment. They're paying a lot of money to do it, but they're also creating jobs in the process.
Sure.
And that's what we need here.
And jobs are not just, businesses, there's the first order economic benefit, but then there's also the second and third order. It's the, it's the where they go to get lunch for the employees. It's all the, ancillary services that contribute to the town economy on a year-round basis. That's what's so important. I was thinking, we were talking before about our friends, the Krupinskis, and the tragedy there, but what I always thought was so cool about them was they made a concerted effort not to rent to anybody who was not a year-round business, and that was very important to them. And because they wanted it to be a vibrant year-round community, and that's what we need is we need some of our citizens to step up and fill that void. They're not going to be able to, but to step up and be part of the civic life, and then to create opportunities for year-round businesses. Industrial Road is a great example. Southampton's done a fine job around Gabreski Airport with some of the industrial development. We should be doing that too. And it's an interesting question why not only are we not doing it, we seem to be doing our best to prevent it from being a success. You look at CPF acquisitions and you look at that's money taken off the tax roll. Well, no one wants to keep track of, okay, what is the benefit of reduced services, et cetera, versus the cost of the direct cost and then the year-to-year costs of not having it on the tax roll. No one wants to keep these proper records. We don't keep the sort of data here. We don't have the capability here yet. We should develop it so we can make these sort of longer-term plans. Everything is a year-to-year thing. This is true with Deepwater. This is true with any number of things where there's just not the data because people don't want to keep it.
One of the things, if you talk about a long-term opportunity or challenge is we have seawater rising. I think most people agree there is a climate change, forgetting what its cause is.
No question.
And the water is rising. So if you look at that and you look at some of the federal government's maps of land that will be underwater in 20 or 30 years, you know, there's a lot of land out here in the town of East
Terrifying.
Hampton.
It's absolutely terrifying.
It's really terrifying.
And
yet,
it's also the salinization of the water table as well that comes from the sea level rising too. Even if the water's not underground, the land is not underwater rather, there's implications for the water quality as well.
And I think one of the problems, maybe I'm overstating it, that I see happening in the town is people are talking a lot about putting sewers in Montauk, which is a 20 or 30 year payback for bonding. And yet at the same time, in 20 or 30 years, parts of Montauk will be underwater. So, you know, I think there's some of the planning, and I'm not saying that all of Montauk will be, I don't know enough about it. But I know parts of Montauk will probably be underwater, or at least the water table will be higher.
And there are ways of mitigating it. I mean, the Dutch have had a very advanced system. Miami Beach has done, and very interesting things with levees and dams and dikes and things of that nature. You know, that's what we should be looking at. That's what we should be spending money on. You know, that technology, this is a problem that is not a unique problem to Montauk or East Hampton, frankly. And we should be getting the best and the brightest, not some, you know, Hamlet charrette nonsense. I mean, seriously. I mean, it's risible. I'll leave it at that.
Well, none of us knew what the word charrette meant. Now we all know what a charrette is. A charrette is, you know, one of those things you walk around and get people's attention for a while. But again, and Amos, I really appreciate you coming today, and I hope you'll join us again for more voices.
I would be delighted to. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the great work GGG does, and we need you guys to step up. We need everybody to emulate the work you're doing, and
thank you very much.
To the credit. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, everybody.